It's the year 1725. Or is it? You light a candle, open a dusty book, consult the stars, everything seems normal. But what if everything you know about history, Charlemagne, the year 1000, centuries of kings and battles, never actually happened? What if we're living in a lie? Welcome to Probably Not True, where history's weirdest conspiracies meet cold, hard facts. Today we're diving headfirst into one of the weirdest, most brain-melting conspiracy theories that you've probably never heard of. The Phantom Time Hypothesis. Yes, you heard that right. Now this theory suggests that somewhere along the line, roughly 300 years of history, including the entire early Middle Ages, were completely made up. Fabricated, a historical fever dream. And according to this idea, we're not actually living in the year 2025. We're kicking around somewhere closer to 1725, blissfully unaware that entire centuries never really happened. Now you're probably blinking at me confused. Well, buckle up, because this story's got everything. Calendar errors, forged documents, crooked priests, phantom emperors who may or may not have existed, and a medieval cover-up so bold it would make even the most seasoned conspiracy theorists clutch at their pearls. Fake popes? Check. Imaginary battles? You bet it. A 10th century emperor rewriting the timeline because he felt a little bit insecure? Absolutely. This is probably not true, and today we're peeling back the layers on one of history's most bizarre claims. Get ready to question everything you thought you knew about the calendar that's hanging on your wall. Now the myth. What the theory claims. What exactly does the Phantom Time Hypothesis argue? First floated into the intellectual void by German historian Herbert Illig in 1991. This was a man who took one look at history and thought, you know what this needs? Fewer centuries. Now this theory makes some pretty bold claims here. The entire period between 614 and 911 AD never actually happened. This means major historical figures from that era, like the mighty Charlemagne, fabricated, exaggerated, or at least heavily distorted versions of reality, historical fan fiction rather than fact. The Gregorian calendar reform, the one that Pope Gregory introduced in 1582 to fix the slight wobble in the Julian calendar, this was based on false assumptions, inadvertently inserting an extra 297 years into human history. In other words, everything that you think happened during those missing centuries, wars, kings, popes, Viking raids, Byzantine intrigue, religious councils, monks feverishly copying epic poetry by candlelight, all of this was fake. This was a historical ghost town. Humanity's equivalent of finding out that the middle season of your favourite TV show was just a weird fever dream. According to Illig, sometime during the rule of Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, which was around the real 700s mind you, not the made up thousands, a grand historical hoax was perpetrated. Otto, along with Pope Sylvester II and possibly a few creative scribes, allegedly decided that he deserved to reign during the year 1000. After all, triple zeros carry serious religious significance. Nothing says divinely ordained ruler like a millennial coronation. Unlike millennials today. The only problem, this calendar was inconveniently off schedule. It was only around the year 700, which makes Otto's reign, his big historically significant Millennium Bash, just far too early. So the solution to this is naturally add a few centuries to the calendar, just slip them in. Round up the dates a little bit. Pretend 300 years of history had already happened and call it a day. Easy, as one does. And according to Illig, this massive historical retcon was then dutifully backfilled with fabricated documents, imaginary rulers, imaginary kings and queens, and historical records were creatively adjusted in order to make everything look nice and official. Future historians, blissfully unaware that they're dealing with the greatest temporal con job in history, simply accepted it. And ever since, the fake centuries have been ticking along, and we're none the wiser, sheeple. Now, the origins of this theory. To be fair to Herbert Illig, and we do try to be fair, even, to historical flat earthers, or the equivalent of flat earthers, He wasn't just some crank in a basement with a corkboard full of red string. Illig was an actual historian. He was one who got deeply, profoundly frustrated with what he saw as glaring inconsistencies in the historical world of the Middle Ages, however. He did point to a few key problems that, according to him, just didn't add up. He cited a suspicious lack of archaeological evidence from the 7th to the 9th centuries. There were fewer ruins, fewer artifacts, and fewer signs that humans were out there doing human things during that time. He pointed to inconsistencies in historical documents, gaps, contradictions, and what he saw as suspiciously tidy narratives, emerging out of a time when most people were still figuring out how to spell their own names. And then alleged issues with dendrochronology, or tree ring dating. Try saying that 3 times fast, because I couldn't. And radiocarbon dating, which suggested that Illig claimed some timelines were stretched thinner than a medieval monk's patience during Lent. The argument went something like this. The early Middle Ages, sometimes referred to as the Dark Ages, were suspiciously, well, dark. There were few major cultural advancements. There was minimal documentation. Illiteracy was widespread. There was basically a 300-year-long shrug in human history, and to Illig it looked more like a gaping hole than a rough patch. He then tied in the Gregorian calendar reform of 1582. The Julian calendar, the old one that Julius Caesar kind of slapped together, had been running slow, and it was accumulating a drift of about 11 minutes a year, which meant by the 16th century the calendar was now off by about 10 days. So when Pope Gregory introduced the Gregorian calendar, he ordered a correction by skipping those 10 days to bring the calendar back in sync with the solar year. And Illig saw this as a cosmic clerical error, and he took it a giant leap further. What if the problem with the calendar wasn't just a mere few days off? What if it was centuries off? And what if, to smooth things over, medieval scribes didn't just make minor edits, but created entire centuries from scratch in order to make this new calendar work? Now let's be real. Medieval scribes were hardly the most reliable narrators. They were prone to copying errors, embellishments, and the occasional creative flourish when the facts got a little dull. And in fairness to them, if you had to write out thousands of years of human history by hand, you'd get a little bit bored too. Now Illig's thought process seemed to be, if you can trust monks to illuminate a manuscript with tiny gold dragons, maybe you can also trust them to accidentally indent 3 centuries of fake emperors and fictional wars. Illig wasn't just questioning a few dusty old dates, no, he was calling into question the very chronology we use to understand the past, arguing that the historical timeline was off by 3 whole centuries, and we just never noticed. For over 1,000 years. Because apparently, everybody was just too polite to check the monk's work. Now, what the evidence says. Ah yes, evidence. The inconvenient thing that conspiracy theories tend to trip over on their way out the door. Let's take a look at what the real world has to say about the phantom time hypothesis. Archaeological evidence. Here's the first big problem for the phantom time hypothesis. Archaeology exists. And unlike wild theories, archaeology comes with receipts. We're not talking about vague hand-wavy claims here, we're talking about actual physical coins, buildings, manuscripts, art, weaponry, pottery, and countless artifacts that can be reliably dated right to the supposedly phantom centuries. Charlemagne's empire, not just medieval fanfic. The Aachen Cathedral, commissioned by Charlemagne around 790 AD, still stands to this day. You can visit it, take a guided tour, marvel at the very real and very tangible evidence that people were doing serious construction work during these fake years. Thousands of everyday objects have been found, from swords and shields to religious relics and jewellery. These have all been carbon dated to the 7th, 8th and 9th centuries that, remember people, don't exist. They weren't planted there by some kind of historical Illuminati, they are there, physically. Manuscripts like the Codex Aureus of Lorsch aren't just old books, they showcase artistic styles, language and craftsmanship that show a clear stylistic evolution in line with known historical trends. In other words, they fit perfectly into the flow of human cultural development, and they're not into a sci-fi timeline hack job. If these centuries were made up, Someone had to go to an awful lot of trouble to forge millions of these objects, these buildings, these texts, and somehow did it all before 3D printers were a thing. It's an impressive feat, but it's not very plausible. The phantom time hypothesis also leans heavily on the claim that the errors in the Julian to Gregorian calendar switchover introduced a massive 300-year glitch. But here's the thing, historians and astronomers at this time actually did know what they were doing. The Julian calendar was imperfect, and we lost about 11 minutes per year. Over centuries, from the Roman times, that does add up. But by the time Pope Gregory called for calendar reform in 1582, the drift had accumulated to about 10 days, not 300 years. The calendar reform corrected a drift caused over roughly 1600 years of misalignment, not 1300. The math, and sorry conspiracy theorists, does check out. And I know this is a history podcast and not a maths, but it has a terrible habit of crushing wildly entertaining theories under the cold, hard boot of reality. Now let's talk trees, specifically tree rings. Dendrochronology, or the science of studying tree rings, provides an unbroken year-by-year record stretching back thousands of years in some cases. Ancient timbers preserved in everything from shipwrecks to old construction sites have ring patterns that line up precisely with radiocarbon dating, astronomical records, and known historical events. And guess what? There's no missing 300 years, there's no gaps, there's no weird tree ring void where the fake century should be. Just a whole lot of trees quietly, stubbornly recording the passage of time. Nature's receipts, nature's historians if you will, filed meticulously in the geological filing cabinet. And finally, let's not forget the paper trail. If 300 years of human history were fabricated, you would expect massive inconsistencies between civilizations. You'd expect chaotic time gaps between Europe, the Islamic Caliphate, Byzantium, China, and anywhere else that bothered to keep a diary or a calendar really. But instead, everything lines up. The spread of Islam in the 7th century, the reign of the Tang dynasty in China, the Viking invasions of Europe, and the flourishing of Byzantium under emperors, whose records neatly coincide with both Islamic and European sources. All these independent records, written by people who had never heard of each other or interacted with each other, fit together like pieces of a very old, very complicated jigsaw puzzle. They each corroborate each other's timeline without the need for global Zoom calls or WhatsApp groups. Now if this was a hoax, it would have been the most synchronized, flawlessly executed international conspiracy in history. And let's be honest, humanity can barely coordinate traffic lights across a city, let alone orchestrate a millennium-spanning historical forgery. Moving on to why people believe it, the psychology of historical conspiracies. Why do people latch on to theories like the phantom time hypothesis, even when all the evidence against them could fill a cathedral? Well, the simple fact is, history is messy. It's full of gaps, it's full of contradictions, and weird little anomalies that don't always make sense at first glance. These gaps and inconsistencies make people uncomfortable, because we crave neatness, we crave a clean narrative, not the chaotic, coffee-stained rough draft that history usually becomes. And then big claims are exciting. If I say to you, 300 years of history never happened, it's a lot more thrilling than, well, actually it's complicated and we're still piecing some of it together. We as humans love the grand narrative. It's baked into our DNA. History is storytelling. It's centuries and centuries of families sitting each other down and telling stories before we even wrote it down. The Iliad was a spoken word poem. We're wired to search for patterns, for meaning. It's baked into our DNA. We're looking for the feeling that we've uncovered a hidden truth that others are too blind or lazy to see. And usually conspiracy theories serve that up. They offer simplicity. No more messy debates about the fall of Rome or the rise of feudalism. Just one neat theory. It never happened. There's also the element of hidden knowledge. You feel like you know the secret and that you're in a secret club. You're smarter than those poor deluded historian sheeple with their degrees and their evidence. And then that creates a feeling of superiority. Nothing strokes the ego quite like believing that you've outwitted all of academia. Trust me, I've been there. It's not about facts, it's about the thrill of feeling like you know something that no one else does. And then of course, there's the cultural moment that we're all marinating in. In an era where terms like fake news are tossed around like confetti, where public trust in authority figures is at a record low and plummeting, and where questioning everything has practically become a hobby, conspiracy theories thrive. Twitter is a cesspool of conspiracy theories. It's like weeds in a cracked sidewalk. Inevitable, fast-growing, and weirdly stubborn. Phantom time theory hits that sweet spot. It's a heady cocktail of medieval intrigue, secret cabals, chronological confusion, and just the right amount of everything you know is wrong energy to make it feel edgy. And honestly, it's fun. It's fun researching this, it's fun talking about this. Sure, there's no real evidence to support it, but it does sound amazing, doesn't it? A secret medieval cover-up, missing centuries, fake emperors. It's like the plot of a historical thriller, minus the pesky need for a coherent plot or, facts that you can verify. And in the end, Phantom Time isn't compelling because it's true. It's compelling because it's entertaining. And in a world where attention is currency, a flashy reality-bending conspiracy theory is hard to resist. Final verdict. Did 300 years of history never happen? No, not even close, it's not true. The archaeological evidence, the calendar corrections, the astronomical records, the tree rings, the manuscripts, they all line up like a meticulously organised historical conga line. There's no phantom time, there's no grand medieval cover-up. Charlemagne was real. The Middle Ages were real. I never thought I had to say the word Charlemagne was real on a history podcast, but there we go. And yes, unfortunately for the conspiracy theorist, the math checks out. It turns out humans really were trudging through centuries of feudalism, plague, Viking invasions, and questionable hygiene practices. They didn't just fast forward from the fall of Rome to the Renaissance while no one was looking. The phantom time hypothesis, whilst wildly entertaining, and let's be honest, a lot more fun to explain at parties than actual medieval history, because I don't have time for that, it simply doesn't hold up to even the gentlest scrutiny. The maths say no, the trees say no, the ruins say no, even the old scribes with all their embellishments and medieval doodles say no. Phantom time rating, 2 out of 10 missing centuries. Fun to think about, but the maths, the trees, and about 1,000 years of ruins and relics strongly disagree. Thank you for tuning in to Probably Not True, the podcast where history's weirdest, wildest myths get the cold, hard reality check that they didn't know they needed. New episodes drop every Monday, so if you love your history served with a side of skepticism and a generous helping of sarcasm, make sure you're following wherever you get your podcasts. Do you want bonus episodes, secret content, early access, and even deeper dives into history's most questionable corners? Check out our Patreon, links in the show notes. Support the show, unlock some chaos, and join the growing club of people who also think that facts are cooler than fiction. Next time on Probably Not True. Was Rasputin really a mystic? Or just very, very hard to kill? And seriously, how many times can one guy almost die?